Tell him. Tell him what happens when a man lies to his family for years.
The first time my wife ever raised her voice at me in public, it was in a bank lobby on a Tuesday morning with 12 strangers watching. She slammed a white envelope down on the polished oak counter so hard the acrylic penholder jumped. "Tell him," she said to the woman behind the desk, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Tell him what happens when a man lies to his family for years." Every head in that lobby turned. An older couple waiting near the brochures went still. A man in a blue work shirt froze halfway through filling out a deposit slip. Even the little printer behind the teller window seemed to pause between clicks. I didn't say a word. I just stood there beside my wife, Claire, in the same grease-marked navy button-down I'd worn to open the shop that morning, looking at the envelope I had already seen once before and hoping, stupidly, maybe, that if I stayed calm long enough, this thing could still be handled without breaking both of us in half. The branch manager, a woman named Elena Alvarez, looked from Claire to me and then back to the paper. Her face changed. Not dramatically. Elena was too professional for that, but I saw it happen anyway. That small tightening around her eyes people get when they realize the story in front of them is not the story they thought they were stepping into. "Mrs. Mercer," she said carefully, "I think it would be better if we moved this conversation into my office." Claire let out a bitter laugh. "No, I'm done doing things quietly. If my husband can keep this from me for God knows how long, then we can talk right here." That hurt more than I let show. Not because she was loud. Because 6 months earlier, I might have said the same thing about me if I'd been standing where she was. Elena took a breath, opened the file, and slid one page free. "Mom," she said softly, "the foreclosure action isn't attached to your husband's business." Claire's jaw flexed. "What?" Elena lowered her voice, but not enough to save us from the room hearing the shape of it. "It's attached to a personal guarantee signed in your name." Claire stared at her like the sentence had arrived in the wrong language. Then she turned slowly toward me, and in that second, standing under those two bright recessed lights with the air conditioner humming above us, and strangers trying not to stare, I understood something ugly and final. She had walked into that bank, absolutely certain this disaster belonged to me, not to us, to me. "What did she just say?" Claire asked, but she wasn't really asking Elena anymore. She was asking me, and there was already fear crawling under the anger now, the kind that makes people speak more quietly, because some part of them can feel the floor moving. I didn't answer right away. Because there are truths you hold back to protect someone. And then there are truths you hold back so long they rot everything around them. By the time I spoke, the bank lobby felt smaller. She said, "I told my wife that this started with something you signed 6 years ago." Claire blinked once hard. And if you've ever watched someone's certainty die in real time, then you know how quiet a human face can become when it realizes it might have been wrong in the worst possible direction. But that wasn't even the part that was going to break us. The part that was going to break us was what Elena said next. "Your husband," she said, folding her hands together on the desk like she wished she were anywhere else, "has been making payments against that default for the last 9 months. Claire's head snapped toward me. 9 months. 9 months of late-night wiring forms, stripped savings, pawn tickets I hid in a coffee can under my workbench, and one phone call I had replayed so many times I could hear it in my sleep. 9 months of trying to fix a fire without telling my wife she'd accidentally struck the match. The older man by the brochure rack turned away at that point, giving us the privacy people offer when they know privacy has already been lost. Claire's lips parted, but no sound came out. And standing there in the middle of that bank, I knew 2 things at once. First, that the worst day of our marriage had already started. And second, that if I didn't tell her the full truth now, all at once, then whatever survived this would be too crooked to call a marriage anymore. But to understand how a foreclosure notice ended up with my wife's name on it, and why she thought the blame belonged to me, you need to go back to that morning, before the bank, before the envelope, before Claire looked at me like I was a stranger wearing my husband's face. You need to go back to our kitchen at 7:12 a.m., when the coffee was still too hot to drink, and I still had one last chance to tell the truth before the truth came and told itself. Our house sits on a narrow lot in Matthews, just outside Charlotte, the kind of neighborhood where every driveway seems to have a basketball hoop and a pressure-washed SUV. We bought it 11 years ago with more optimism than money. Back then, Claire was a project coordinator, making 48 grand a year. And I was running 2 bays out of a rented cinder block garage with a borrowed lift and a sign I painted myself. Mercer Auto and Tire. That sign still hangs over the shop now, sun-faded, one corner slightly crooked because my father and I put it up ourselves and he insisted the ladder was stable, even when it plainly wasn't. He died 3 years later. And there are still mornings I can hear him clearing his throat behind me when I unlock the side door. That Tuesday, I was halfway through my first cup of coffee when Claire came down the hall with her phone in one hand and the mail in the other. She was already dressed for work in a cream blouse and charcoal slacks, hair pinned up, expression tight in the way it got when she was mentally moving through meetings before the day had even started. Claire was the kind of woman who could make a spreadsheet feel like a personal challenge. Smart, fast, composed. The kind of composed that people mistake for invulnerability. At 41, she had climbed from assistant operations analyst to regional director at a medical equipment firm with offices across the Southeast. She handled vendor contracts, staffing, budgets, all of it. People at her office used words like decisive and polished and unflappable. At home, those same qualities looked a little different. At home, they often looked like control. She sorted the mail standing up, grocery flyer, 2 catalogs, electric bill, then the white envelope, certified. Her brow furrowed. What is this? I knew before she opened it. There are some pieces of paper that change the air in a room before anybody reads them. I set my mug down. Claire. She slid her finger under the flap, unfolded the notice, and went very still. Not angry right away, not loud, just still. Then she looked up at me. What is foreclosure counsel? I felt my chest tighten. Not because I didn't know what the notice said. Because I did. Because I had seen the same letter at the shop the day before when Ms. Alvarez called to tell me the lender had accelerated the final demand after we missed the previous month's negotiated installment. We. That word matters more than people think. When one person in a marriage says we, and the other person hears you, there's almost always a collapse coming. Daniel, Claire's voice sharpened. What is this? I should have told her then. I should have said, 6 years ago, your old boss put paper in front of you, and you signed it because you trusted the wrong man. 9 months ago, it resurfaced like a body in shallow water. I have been drowning quietly ever since, trying to drag it back down before you ever had to know. Instead, I said the worst thing a husband can say when his wife is holding disaster in both hands. Let's go to the bank and talk in person. Her face changed immediately. You can get away with staying calm around some people. Around your wife, if she already feels fear. Calm can sound like confession. Talk in person, she said. About what exactly? Daniel, is this because of the shop? The shop. That told me where her mind had gone first. Not to some forgotten contract from her old job. Not to the possibility that life is more tangled than the easiest explanation. Straight to my business. To the place that had kept us afloat through Claire's layoff scare in 2020. Through her mother's cardiac rehab. Through 2 roof leaks and 1 emergency transmission replacement on her sister's car that somehow became our problem. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, buying time I didn't deserve. Claire, just get your purse. No. It came out flat, immediate. The word of someone who was already collecting evidence against you. She looked from the paper to me and back again. You told me last quarter was better. It was. You said the line of credit was under control. It was being handled. She laughed once, ugly and disbelieving. Being handled. Is that what this is? I remember the kitchen clock ticking loud enough to hear then. The dog next door barking 2 houses over. Sunlight hitting the corner of the dining room table, where her laptop bag sat packed and ready, like the day was still normal. I remember all that because when your life shifts, the little sounds get strangely permanent. Claire, I said as evenly as I could, I need you to trust me for 1 hour. That was the wrong sentence too. People don't trust you more because you ask for trust in a moment when truth would do. Her mouth tightened. 1 hour? Daniel, I'm looking at a foreclosure notice with our address on it. Our address. Not yours. Not mine. Our. For 1 second, I thought maybe we could still find our way through it. Then she said quietly, "How long were you planning to hide this?" And there it was. The verdict before the hearing. I took my keys off the counter. "We're going to the bank." She stared at me for another beat, then snatched up her purse so fast the strap knocked against the chair. We drove in separate cars. That was how bad it already was. I followed her silver Lexus down Independence Boulevard, all the way to the branch, past a church sign advertising Wednesday night prayer and a gas station where I'd once spent our last $38 filling up both cars in the same week. Claire got the flu and couldn't work. She parked crooked. Claire never parks crooked. I sat in my truck for 10 extra seconds, one hand on the steering wheel, and looked at the dashboard long enough to see my own reflection faintly in the windshield. 43 years old. Calloused hands. A wedding ring with a scratch across it from the week I rebuilt a transmission and forgot to take it off. And eyes that looked more tired than any man should let himself get before breakfast. I knew what waited in that bank. I knew about the signature. I knew about the lender. I knew about the recorded call and the settlement draft in the locked bottom drawer of my workbench. And the pawn ticket from the truck I told Claire I'd donated to a veterans raffle because telling her I'd sold the last thing my father ever left me felt too close to telling her why. What I didn't know, not yet, was whether my wife would hear the truth once it came, or whether she'd only hear how long I had kept it from her. That distinction was going to decide everything. Back in the lobby after Elena told Claire I'd been making payments for 9 months, the world seemed to narrow to the width of the desk between us. Claire looked at me the way people look at a bridge after they hear the first crack. "You knew," she said. Not loud now. Worse, soft. The kind of soft that means the hurt has made it inside. "Yes." "When?" 9 months ago." Her face drained. She swallowed. 9 months? Elena cleared her throat gently. "Why don't we step into my office?" This time Claire didn't argue. She just walked. We followed Elena into a small glass-walled room with a fake ficus in the corner and a framed photo of the Charlotte skyline behind the desk. The blinds were half closed, but not enough to erase the feeling that the world was still looking in. Elena sat, opened the file, and laid out 3 documents in front of us. The first was the default notice. The second was a copy of a personal guarantee signed by Claire Ann Mercer. The third was a ledger showing 9 months of negotiated payments. Every one issued from Mercer Auto and Tire. Claire stared at the signature first. People always look at their own names before anything else when trouble gets official. "That can't be right," she whispered. "It is," Elena said carefully. The original obligation was attached to a commercial equipment lease for Holloway Mobile Imaging Solutions. The guarantor listed was Claire Ann Mercer, then Director of Regional Launch Operations. Claire blinked. Once, twice, the room held still around her. Then I saw it land. Not the whole truth. Just the memory of where to start digging. "Holloway," she said. Grant Holloway. 6'2", white teeth, navy suits. The kind of man who never said thank you without sounding like he expected to be thanked back. 6 years earlier, he had been Claire's division vice president at Bellwether Clinical Systems, back when the company was expanding too fast and everyone called it exciting instead of reckless. Grant liked Claire because she was competent and young enough then to still mistake pressure for opportunity. He once told her, in front of half a conference room, "You're the kind of person I can trust to move quickly without getting emotional." Claire came home glowing that night. I remember because she repeated it over pasta, like it was the nicest thing anyone had ever said to her at work. I wanted to tell her any man who praises you for not getting emotional is usually hoping you won't get suspicious either. I didn't. Back then, I still thought marriage meant trusting, that the person you love will see what you see when it matters. Sometimes they don't. Claire pressed 2 fingers to her temple. He asked me to sign a temporary guarantee packet for the mobile imaging rollout in Greenville. He said legal was delayed. The board had already approved the expansion, and they just needed an officer signature on file for 48 hours so the leasing company could release the units. Elena nodded. "That appears to be the original file, yes." "I wasn't a guarantor," Claire said, more firmly now, as if confidence alone could revive paper. "I signed as a placeholder. Grant told me corporate indemnification would replace it." Apparently, Elena said, and I felt for her because there is no gentle way to say what comes next. It did not. Claire stared down at the page, then looked at me slowly. You knew this was because of Grant? Yes. And you didn't tell me? No. Her eyes flashed. Why? There it was. The question I had answered for myself 100 times and still never well enough to survive saying aloud. Because I saw what it would do to you. Because when the lender found the file, you were already working 80-hour weeks, trying to keep your region from getting cut after the acquisition. Because your mother had just gotten out of cardiac rehab and your sister still wasn't speaking to you unless she needed something. Because the first day I brought the paperwork home and laid it on the kitchen counter, you looked at one line, your own name typed above the word guarantor. And I saw shame hit you before you even asked the right questions. Because I knew if you understood what had happened, you would blame yourself so hard. You'd break something in you that I didn't know how to put back together. And because some men are stupid enough to confuse protection with love. I looked at my hands, because I thought I could fix it before you had to carry it. Claire gave a small, stunned laugh that had no humor in it at all. Carry it, she said. Daniel, I am carrying it. My name is on it. I didn't argue because she was right. That's the thing nobody tells you about protecting someone with silence. Even when your intentions are clean, the silence still belongs to you. Claire turned back to the ledger. How much? Elena hesitated. Tell me. A little over $138,000 remained when Mr. Mercer negotiated the payment plan. With fees and counsel costs, the active amount on the acceleration notice is $146,209. Claire sat back like someone had shoved her. She wasn't prepared for that number. Truthfully, neither was I the first time. The original lease had been smaller, but years of interest, restructures, and a default judgment against the dissolved venture had swollen it into something ugly and patient. Because Claire had signed personally. Because Bellwether's acquisition buried the paper trail. Because the lender sold the debt, and then found fresh leverage when we refinanced our mortgage 3 years earlier. It came back with teeth. I don't understand, Claire said, voice thinning. Why now? Elena folded her hands. The account was dormant in litigation for some time. When the debt was purchased and reviewed during enforcement, your guarantee was reactivated. The house was identified as the strongest recoverable asset. That's what your home becomes in certain offices. Not the front porch where your wife cried when you brought her home from the hospital after surgery. Not the kitchen wall with pencil marks tracking the height of kids you never got to have. Not the bedroom where you once lay awake listening to the person you love breathe and thought that sound alone counted as wealth. An asset. Claire's breathing changed, got shallower, faster. I'd seen that before too. Once when the doctor told us our second round of IVF hadn't taken. And once when her mother's blood pressure crashed in the ER waiting room. I leaned forward. Claire. She flinched away from my hand. That hurt worse than the bank. I need air, she said. Then she stood so quickly, the chair legs screeched against the floor and walked out before Elena or I could stop her. I found her in the parking garage beside her car, one hand braced against the concrete pillar like the ground might tilt. The fluorescent lights overhead made everybody look sick in that garage. Claire looked worse. I kept a few feet between us. Claire, she didn't turn around. Don't. I waited. Finally, she said, did you think I was too weak to know? There are questions that come at you pointed like knives, and if you answer them too quickly, you bleed more. No, I said. I thought you were already carrying enough. She turned then. Her eyes were wet, but she was still holding herself upright the way Claire always had. Like falling apart in front of another person was a kind of failure she had not trained for. You don't get to decide what I carry, she said. I nodded once. I know. No, she snapped. I don't think you do. Because for 9 months, you let me go to work, sit in meetings, plan budgets, worry about bonus targets and mom's meds and all the normal things a person worries about while this. She held up the notice like it might burn her fingers, was sitting under our life. I was trying to get in front of it. And did it ever occur to you, she said, laughing that broken laugh again, that maybe I had a right to know my own name was attached to $146,000 of debt? Yes, every day. Every single day since last October when the first certified letter came to the shop. Because I had rerouted the mail after seeing the initial law office notice and realizing the old file might actually be enforceable. I had stood in the back office then, reading Claire's name over and over, and in the strange stillness that follows a blow you didn't see coming, I had made what felt like a noble decision. I will handle this. I will keep her safe. I will buy time. The trouble with buying time is that interest accumulates, on debt, on resentment, on truth. Claire looked at me with something colder now. What else don't I know? That question did it, because there was an answer. And I could either tell it myself or let the wreckage tell it for me in pieces. So I reached into my pocket, pulled out my keys, and held up the small brass one from my workbench drawer. Come to the shop, I said. Her eyes narrowed. Why? Because if I tell you the rest, I want you to see all of it at once. She stared at me for a long time. Then she opened her car door, got in, and shut it without another word. If you've ever followed your own wife across town knowing that when she stops loving the man she believed you were, she may also stop recognizing the man you actually are, then you know there's a very specific kind of quiet that fills a truck cab. Not peaceful, not empty, loaded. Drove back to Mercer Auto in that silence, turned under the faded sign, and parked near Bay 2. Claire's Lexus stopped 2 spaces over. The shop was officially closed for the morning. I'd flipped the open sign to back at 8:30 when we left. The lot smelled faintly, like hot rubber and summer rain that hadn't fallen yet. Inside, the front office was cramped and familiar. Old laminate desk, mismatched waiting chairs. A coffee maker no one admitted was terrible because it was free. And a wall calendar from a parts supplier showing a beach nobody in town had time to visit. Claire stood just inside the doorway while I locked it behind us. Then I walked past the counter, through the service area, and into the back office where I kept the safe, the invoices, and the things a man tells himself are temporary secrets. The bottom drawer of my steel workbench, stuck in humid weather, it always had. My father used to kick it once, with the side of his boot, and call it character. I opened it, pulled out a thick brown accordion folder, and set it on the desk. Claire didn't move. What is that? The truth, I said, and even to my own ears it sounded tired. I opened the folder. Inside were 9 months of bank correspondence, settlement offers, payment receipts, copies of the original guarantee, notes from the attorney I'd quietly hired for a consult, and one small white envelope with the pawn shop receipt for my father's truck. Claire's eyes found that envelope before I said anything. What is that? I handed it to her. She opened it, scanned the slip, and frowned. Then she looked up sharply. Daniel, I swallowed. The F-100. Her face went blank. My father's truck was a 1968 Ford F-100 in sunburned red, with a bench seat that smelled like old vinyl and motor oil. He taught me to drive in that truck. We brought it home from the storage barn the week after his funeral. I rebuilt the carburetor with him in my head, because by then, that was the only place I had him left. Claire had asked about it in February. I told her I'd entered it in a charity raffle through one of the veterans groups in Monroe, because I didn't have time to restore it right and wanted it to go to somebody who would. That was a lie. I sold it to cover the second negotiated lump sum when the lender refused to pause counsel fees without a show of good faith. Claire sank into the chair like her knees no longer trusted the room. You sold your dad's truck, yes. To pay this? Yes. Her hand tightened around the slip. Why wouldn't you tell me? Because you love that truck almost as much as I did. Because watching me lose something that old and that personal over your signature would have branded you in your own mind in a way I didn't think our marriage could survive. Because some part of me was still trying to save not just your peace, but your image of yourself. I rubbed a hand over my face. Because by then you were already blaming yourself, and you didn't even know all of it yet. She stared down at the folder again. You said business had slowed in February. It had, but not enough to sell your father's truck. No, she inhaled slowly through her nose, the way she does when anger is trying to reorganize itself into something more useful. Then she began sorting through the papers in silence, receipt after receipt, wire confirmations, a legal pad with my handwriting figuring payment options in columns, one settlement letter from the lender. A note from attorney Nina Patel explaining why the guarantee might be challengeable if we could prove inducement or fraudulent retention. And beneath that, the draft of a private proposal I had never shown Claire. She pulled it free, read 3 lines, then looked up. You were going to surrender the shop. I said nothing. Daniel, yes. Her voice cracked on my name for the first time that day. I looked at the page in her hand. It was my own signed draft authorizing the voluntary sale of Mercer Auto's equipment, customized and lease rights to a chain operator who had been circling my business for 2 years. The sale would have covered the majority of the debt if the lender agreed to release Claire from further personal exposure. I had not finalized it, but I had come close. You were going to give up the shop, she repeated, like repeating it might make the sentence answer itself. If it came to that, her eyes filled faster this time. That shop is your whole life. No, I said quietly. You're my whole life. People say lines like that in movies and it sounds easy. In real life, it sounds terrible, because love is not noble when it arrives wrapped around self-erasure. It sounds like a man explaining the shape of his own damage. Claire lowered herself fully into the chair and covered her mouth with one hand. For a while, the only sound in that back office was the ticking of the wall clock and the faraway clang of metal from the neighboring muffler place. Then she asked the question I had been dreading most. How did this even come back now? Grant left Bellwether years ago. That was when I pulled out my phone. There's one more thing, I said. No sentence in marriage is ever safe after those words. I opened a folder of saved recordings and held the phone for a second longer than I needed to. The audio came from a call 9 months earlier. Not a perfect smoking gun, not a courtroom miracle, just one man talking too freely because he still believed charm could outpace consequences. Grant had called me after the first demand letter reached the house by mistake before I rerouted the mail. Claire never saw that one. I did. Somehow he had heard from an old contact that enforcement had revived the guarantee. Maybe he was calling to soothe, maybe to manage me, maybe just to hear whether the bomb had gone off yet. I hit play. Grant's voice filled the room smooth as polished stone. Daniel, look, between us, none of this was supposed to land on Claire. The vehicle lease got rolled into the mobile unit expansion. Legal never cleaned the officer signatures. And then the acquisition buried everything. It's ugly, sure, but if you make enough noise about how she signed under instruction, the first question they're going to ask is why a regional director put her name on paper without reading it. That won't help her career, will it? The room went dead still. I watched Claire's face while it played. At first confusion, then recognition, then something worse than either. Shame mixed with memory. Because she had trusted that voice once, Grant went on. I'm not saying don't contest it. I'm just saying there are smarter ways to handle this than dragging her through a public dispute. You seem like a practical guy. Let the professionals work the debt. Keep Claire out of it. Women like her don't bounce back easy once executive leadership starts questioning judgment. I stopped the recording there. Claire stared at me. When was that? October. You had that in October? Yes, and you still didn't tell me. I let out a breath that felt older than the room. I was afraid of what it would do to you. No, she said, and the tears finally spilled over. You were afraid of what it would do to us. She was right again. That's the unbearable part about these moments. The person who feels most betrayed can also suddenly see you most clearly. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Claire reached into her purse, pulled her wallet with shaking hands, and removed a debit card I didn't recognize. She set it on top of the paperwork between us. I need to tell you something too. I looked at the card. The bank name wasn't ours. What is that? Claire's shoulders folded in on themselves a little. A savings account. I didn't understand at first. What kind of savings account? Her eyes dropped. Mine. The room tilted. I wish I could tell you I reacted with grace. I didn't react at all for about 3 seconds, which was worse. Then I heard my own voice come out flat and careful. Explain. Claire wiped at her face with the heel of her palm. 8 months ago, when you started staying later at the shop and telling me everything was fine, and I could tell it wasn't, I got scared. Scared of what? You failing. There are truths so honest they sound cruel even when they are said through tears. She saw it hit me because she flinched again. I'm sorry, she whispered. I don't mean that the way it sounds. Then tell me the way it is. Claire folded her hands together so tightly, her knuckles paled. I thought the shop was sinking, and you were too proud to say it. I thought one day I was going to wake up and find out everything had collapsed at once. The mortgage, the credit cards, all of it. So I opened a separate account and started moving a little money there every payday. The clock on the wall seemed suddenly loud enough to be mocking us. How much? Just over 12,000. I laughed once, not because it was funny, because I didn't know what else to do with the shape of that hurt. For what? In case I had to leave fast, she said it and then shut her eyes. That was the line. Not the bank, not the debt, not even the truck, that line. In case I had to leave fast. I leaned back against the workbench and stared at the far wall, at an old framed photo of my father and me on opening day. Both of us standing in front of Bay 1 like we'd built something the world could never take. Funny what the world can take once it gets time enough. Claire's voice came smaller now. I never used it for anything else. She shook her head. I needed to feel like if everything went bad, I wouldn't be trapped. I kept looking at the wall, because if I looked at my wife right then, I wasn't sure whether what I said next would be clean enough to survive. Finally, I asked, how long had you already decided I was the kind of man you'd need an exit plan from? She started crying harder. I don't know, I nodded slowly, more to myself than to her. And here, if you're listening to this story, the way people listen when they want one person to be right and the other person to be wrong, you might be tempted to pick your side already. Maybe you think I was noble and Claire was faithless. Maybe you think Claire was practical and I was manipulative. Maybe you think both of us were cowards in different clothes. If you're still listening, ask yourself this before we go further. What destroys a marriage faster? One dangerous lie or 100 protective ones? Because by then we still didn't know the answer. And the truth waiting for us after that back office conversation was bigger than debt, uglier than embarrassment, and closer to our front door than either of us understood. Claire left the shop before noon, not dramatically. No slammed door, no shouted final line. She just picked up the folder with both hands, like it was heavier than paper should be, and said she needed time to think. I let her go because I didn't know how to stop her without making myself smaller in a way I'd already done too many times. The rest of that day, I worked under a Honda Accord with a coolant leak and barely remember anything but the wrench in my hand. Customers came and went. My apprentice, Luis, asked twice if I was feeling okay. I said yes both times because men like me are stupid enough to think keeping your hands busy counts as resilience. At 6:40 that evening, when the shop was closed and the summer heat had finally started to break, I found Claire sitting in her car at the far end of the lot, engine off, window down. She looked at me like she hadn't decided yet whether I was the man she married or a stranger who had merely been loyal enough to pass. I didn't go to work, she said. I nodded. I went to storage instead. What storage? The one on Monroe Road. The boxes from my bellwether years. That got my attention. Claire looked down at her lap where an old blue file folder sat, edges bent, a faded company sticker half peeled from the tab. I found copies, she said. Old launch binders, approval sheets, expense reports. One of them had the Greenville mobile unit packet in it. She swallowed. Daniel, I signed more than one page. I stayed quiet. She gave a hollow laugh. Grant told me legal was swamped and he needed initials in 3 places and a signature at the end. I remember being annoyed because I was about to board a flight and he kept saying it was routine. She looked up at me. I didn't read it. Pain makes memory precise in cruel little ways. What else did you find? A reimbursement memo. My assistant at the time flagged that the indemnification rider hadn't come through. Grant emailed back that legal had it and not to chase. I forwarded that message to myself. Her mouth trembled. I never followed up. Why not? And what I mean is, why trust that man over your own discomfort? Why choose speed over scrutiny when your name was involved? Why believe that the system would protect you because you were useful to it? Claire answered with the honesty of someone too tired to pose anymore. Because I wanted to be the kind of woman who could handle executive pressure without slowing anything down. Because men like Grant reward women for making things easy for them. Because at 35, being called indispensable felt better than being careful. I nodded once. That was one of the truest things she said through all of this. Then she handed me the blue folder. Inside were copies of old Bellwether documents, email printouts, rollout schedules, one grainy office badge photo of a much younger Claire with a harder smile. Tucked near the back was a note in handwriting I recognized as hers. Grant says corporate legal will substitute writer by Friday. Do not bother CFO again. Claire looked embarrassed to even read it. I did bother the CFO once, she said quietly. He never answered. After that I let it go. Of course she did. That's how institutional damage works most of the time. Not with dramatic corruption people can spot instantly, but with small pressures, apply ambitious people until the unsafe thing feels normal. I leaned against the truck. So what now? Claire looked toward the road. I called the number on Nina Patel's card in your folder. I straightened. You what? She can see us tomorrow morning. Us. There it was again. Not enough to heal anything. Enough to hurt differently. The next morning we sat in Nina Patel's office on the 12th floor of a building uptown with floor-to-soiling windows and a waiting room so clean it made my shop boots feel criminal. Nina was in her late 40s, sharp-eyed, efficient, with the kind of voice that could make panic line up single file. She had already reviewed the basics from the documents I'd sent months earlier, under the safe assumption that maybe I was just information gathering, maybe I wasn't ready to act, maybe I still had time to solve it privately. That private fantasy was dead now. Nina took us through the facts. The personal guarantee appeared enforceable on its face. Grant Holloway had since launched a consulting venture, then dissolved it, then resurfaced inside a private equity-backed clinical logistics group. The debt purchaser had every incentive to squeeze hard and settle fast. But there were openings. If Claire had signed under false representation, if Bellwether's internal records showed the guarantee was never meant to remain personal, if Grant knowingly allowed her liability to persist, if the recorded call could help establish his awareness, we can challenge enforceability and pursue fraud-based leverage, Nina said, tapping a yellow legal pad. But I need both of you fully aligned. No more hidden papers. No more surprise accounts. No more solo problem solving. Claire glanced at me, then at the table. I said nothing because I didn't trust myself to say yes without hearing how much it sounded like an indictment. Nina leaned back in her chair. There's something else. Mr. Holloway has likely done versions of this before. Claire looked up sharply. What do you mean? Nina slid a page across the table. 2 names, former Bellwether employees. One had signed an equipment authorization, later expanded by addendum. Another had been listed as temporary operating officer for an entity she never knew survived beyond launch. My stomach tightened. Claire stared. He did this to other people. Maybe not at this scale, Nina said, but yes. He created speed, confusion, and plausible deniability. He favored ambitious mid-level staff with clean records and overloaded calendars, people who wanted to be seen as capable. Claire went pale. It is one thing to learn you were manipulated. It is another to learn you were selected for how predictable your ambition was. Nina folded her hands. Here's the hard part. If we escalate formally, this may become public enough to affect your current employer's view of your judgment. Claire closed her eyes briefly. I felt a familiar instinct rise up in me then. That old reflex to step in front of the blow. Nina saw it happen on my face before I spoke. No, she said sharply, almost kindly. Do not volunteer to absorb this for her. I can see you thinking it. Don't. Claire turned toward me slowly. You were going to, weren't you? I looked at Nina instead. Daniel. I exhaled. Yes, Claire's voice dropped to a whisper. How? I hated that answer. By stating I intercepted the notices early, negotiated privately, and made independent settlement decisions that complicated review. Nina cut in, which would not eliminate her exposure, by the way. It would simply make him look financially reckless and potentially undermine his own business credibility. Claire stared at me like each sentence was taking a brick out from under whatever remained of our life. You were willing to let everyone think this was your fault. Yes. Why? Because I knew how hard you fought to be taken seriously. Because I've watched women lose 15 years of work over one question mark a man never gets asked twice. Because I thought if somebody had to look foolish, I was better built for it than you were. I looked down at the table because I thought I could survive it. That was when Claire started crying again. Not the shocked tears from the shop, not the panic tears from the bank. but something lower and more exhausted. The sound of a person realizing that being loved badly can still feel devastatingly like being loved well. Nina gave us a moment, then pushed a tissue box toward Claire and said the sentence that changed the direction of everything. "If you want the cleanest possible outcome," she said, "someone has to tell the whole truth in a room where it matters. Not part of the truth. Not the kind you trim down to keep everyone respectable. The whole thing." Claire nodded slowly, though I could see fear moving under it. We left with assignments. I would organize every payment record and correspondence thread. Claire would search archived email, cloud backups, old devices, anything that could establish Grant's instructions and Bellwether's knowledge. Nina would contact opposing counsel and request a settlement conference under fraud claim reservation, which is lawyer language. "For we are ready to embarrass your client if you make us." For the next 5 days, our house turned into a paper storm. We worked at opposite ends of the dining room table at first. Laptops open, extension cords everywhere, old banker boxes pulled from closets and garage shelves. There's something almost biblical about a marriage under audit. Every drawer becomes evidence. Every omission becomes a scene. Every "I forgot" sounds thinner than it should. On the second night, Claire found an old voicemail transcript from a former Bellwether admin, confirming Grant wanted regional leadership signatures collected fast because corporate legal was slowing down the mobile asset release. On the third night, I found the original envelope from the first law notice, postmarked to our home, that I had intercepted and moved to the shop. I set it on the table between us and waited for the anger. Claire didn't yell. She just touched the envelope with 2 fingers and said, "So this was the day you decided for both of us." I had no defense left worth making. By Friday, Nina had enough to force a hearing. Not a dramatic courtroom trial. Real life rarely gives you that clean theater. It was a settlement conference in a downtown office suite with a retired judge mediating. Opposing counsel on one side, us on the other, and Grant Holloway scheduled to appear because Nina insisted on it as part of any fraud discussion. The night before, Claire found me alone in the garage, sitting in the cab of the empty space where my father's truck used to be. You can still smell it sometimes if the weather is hot enough. Oil and old leather and dust. She stood by the open garage door in socks, cardigan pulled around her, and said, "I almost left you last spring." I looked straight ahead through the windshield. Not because I was surprised, because by then I wasn't sure how much more truth the night could physically hold. "I had a consultation with a separation attorney," she said. "I didn't sign anything, but I went." I nodded once. "I thought you were shutting me out because the shop was dying and you didn't trust me enough to admit it." And I was angry all the time because I kept hearing Grant's voice in my head telling me men like you always choose pride over honesty. Men like you. That phrase sat between us. She must have heard how ugly it sounded because she started crying again before I said anything. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I let the wrong man narrate my husband to me." That one landed hard, because it was true, and because if I was honest, I had let my own father narrate too much of me as well. Build quiet, carry it yourself. Don't burden the people you love with what your hands can hold. Good advice for work, bad advice for marriage. I finally turned toward her, and I let silence make decisions truth should have made. Claire stepped closer. "Daniel, if tomorrow goes badly," I waited. She wiped at her face. "I don't want you sacrificing the shop." I almost smiled then, just from the strange, sad miracle of hearing her say the word sacrifice at all. "We'll see what tomorrow asks." "No," she shook her head hard. "Listen to me. If the only way out is you burning down everything that matters to you so I can keep pretending I'm protected, then we haven't learned anything." That was the first time since the bank that I felt something open inside me instead of close. Not forgiveness, not yet. Something smaller, recognition. The next morning, Grant Holloway walked into the mediation suite wearing a blue suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, and the exact same expression I remembered from Bellwether holiday parties, a smile that could pass for warmth as long as nobody held it still. He saw Claire first, then me, then Nina, and I watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. Not panic. People like Grant don't panic quickly, they estimate. "Claire," he said, as though we'd run into him near the hotel bar at a conference. I'm sorry it's come to this. Claire didn't answer. He turned to me and lowered his voice. Daniel, I thought we were handling this quietly. I'd said the first honest thing I'd wanted to say to him in 9 months. You thought wrong. The retired judge, Harold Benton, called everyone in. The room was ordinary in the way life-changing rooms often are. Beige walls, a pitcher of water sweating onto a tray, legal pads, speakerphone in the center of the table, fluorescent lights that gave no dignity to anyone. Opposing counsel opened with numbers and postures. Valid guarantee, outstanding obligation, good faith settlement opportunity. Nina responded with the emails, the archived notes, the admin transcript, and finally the recording. Grant's face changed for the first time when he heard his own voice say, "If you make enough noise about how she signed under instruction, the first question they're going to ask is why a regional director put her name on paper without reading it." He didn't look at Claire. He looked at the table. That told me more than apology ever could. After an hour of back and forth, the judge asked if anyone wanted to make a direct statement on the record before. He separated the parties for private caucus, and that was the moment everything could still have gone the old way. The old way would have been me stepping in, me saying I had managed the notices poorly, me framing the harm as a husband's overreach rather than a wife's manipulation, me absorbing the character damage to preserve hers. I could feel the sentence forming already. Then Claire put her hand on my wrist under the table. First time she had touched me since the parking garage. Small contact. Enough. She stood, her voice shook at first, then steadied. "My name is Claire Mercer," she said, "and 6 years ago I signed paperwork I did not properly read, because a senior executive I trusted told me it was temporary and routine. That was my failure." Grant shifted in his chair. Claire kept going. "My second failure was not asking harder questions when I felt something was wrong. My third failure was allowing my husband to carry the consequences in silence because I mistook secrecy for guilt and pride for dishonesty." Nobody moved, not the judge, not opposing counsel, not even Grant. Claire looked directly at him then. "You did not trick a child," she said. "You exploited a system that rewards women for being fast, agreeable, and grateful to be included. And when the debt came back, you counted on my shame doing the rest of your work for you." Grant opened his mouth. The judge raised a hand. "Mr. Holloway, not yet." Claire drew one shaky breath. "My husband sold part of his life to protect me from this. He nearly gave up his business to shield me from consequences I should have faced honestly months ago. I am done letting men decide what truth I can survive. There are moments when a room changes temperature without the thermostat moving. That was one of them." Nina didn't even try to hide the satisfaction in her eyes. Grant looked furious now, which meant the charm had finally run out. The rest unfolded faster than I expected. Once Claire spoke plainly, the leverage shifted. Nina pushed hard on inducement, negligence, reputational exposure, and Grant's pattern with prior employees. Opposing counsel asked for private caucus. Benton separated the rooms. An hour later, the debt purchaser agreed to suspend foreclosure action pending a formal fraud review and contribution demand. Grant's new firm, under pressure to avoid discovery and publicity, agreed to fund a settlement sufficient to release Claire's personal guarantee and cover a major portion of accrued fees. Bellwether's successor insurer, once Nina floated executive knowledge and document mishandling, came in for the rest. No miracles, no applause. Just signatures, terms, releases, and a home that would stay ours. When it was done, Grant tried once, just once, to speak to Claire alone in the hallway. She didn't let him. "I believed you because it was easier than believing I could be wrong that badly," she told him. "That's the last thing of mine you get." Then she walked away. We drove home in silence, but not the same silence. This one didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a burned field after rain. Ruined still, but no longer on fire. At home, Claire went straight to the bedroom and came back with her laptop, the debit card to the separate account, and a yellow folder I had never seen before. She set all three on the kitchen table. "What's that?" I asked. "My consultation papers," she said. "The separation attorney. I didn't touch them." She sat down across from me. "I'm not showing you this to hurt you. I'm showing